Hi guys, tonight we step quietly into a world that has already gone white. Snow keeps falling soft at first, then heavier, until the land you thought you knew disappears beneath it. You're standing at the edge of a frontier town where wooden buildings crouch low against the cold, where fences vanish into drifts, and where the night arrives early and stays. The air smells sharp and clean with a faint bite of smoke from chimneys struggling to stay alive. Somewhere nearby, a door shuts, not with confidence, but with the careful hope that it will keep the wind out. This is the Wild West in winter, and you probably will not survive this without learning how to sleep. Before anything else happens, before your boots even come off, there is something gentle and practical to say. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, leave a comment telling me where you are in the world and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights and let yourself step forward into the cold, because the story does not wait. You arrive with daylight already fading, the sun a pale coin behind thickening cloud. Winter on the frontier is not decorative. It is not the kind of snow that glitters politely on postcards. This is snow that changes rules. Roads disappear. Trails vanish. Sound feels muted, as if the land itself is holding its breath. You feel it immediately in your hands, in your nose, in the way your shoulders rise toward your ears without you noticing. Sleep tonight is no longer something you assume. It is something you must earn. A basic historical truth anchors this moment. During the mid to late 19th century, many frontier settlements across the American West had little infrastructure to deal with heavy winter snowfall. Towns were built fast, often without insulation, and most travellers slept wherever they could, before storms made movement impossible. That fact alone shapes everything that follows. You're not choosing the perfect bed. You're choosing between options that all carry discomfort. As you walk through town, boots crunching softly, you notice how quiet it feels. Snow absorbs sound, and even the usual frontier noise seems wrapped in cotton. Inside this quiet is tension. People move with purpose. Someone drags firewood across packed snow breath puffing white. A woman pulls a shawl tighter, not for style, but because exposed skin stings within seconds. A man glances at the sky, judging not beauty but threat. Tonight is not about rest yet. It is about preparation. You learn quickly that sleep here is communal, negotiated, and deeply physical. Space is limited. Warmth is precious. If you are lucky, you're invited indoors. If not, you improvise. That improvisation is the heartbeat of frontier winter nights. Blankets are counted. Corners are claimed. Fires are coaxed into lasting just a little longer. There is a strange little detail that surprises you. Some frontier diaries mention people sleeping with their boots on during severe snowstorms. It sounds miserable, but the logic is simple. Frozen leather is impossible to force onto numb feet in the morning. Keeping boots on means you can move if the structure collapses, if animals panic, or if fire breaks out. It is uncomfortable, yes, but comfort is not the priority here. Survival quietly takes the lead. As you settle into this first night, you feel how sleep itself changes character. It is lighter, fragmented. You do not sink into it so much as hover near it, alert to every sound. Wind pushes against walls. Snow slides from roofs with a dull thump. Somewhere something scrapes, maybe a branch, maybe an animal, maybe just your imagination stretching in the dark. People at the time understood winter sleep as a vulnerable state. Letters from settlers described nights spent half awake listening for the fire to die or the wind to shift. One common observation appears again and again. Sleep comes in short stretches broken by the need to feed the fire, check the door, or simply change position because one side of your body has gone numb. Scholars continue to debate whether frontier sleep patterns were closer to what historians call segmented sleep, meaning two shorter sleep periods broken by wakefulness, or whether exhaustion forced deeper rest despite conditions. The evidence is uneven. Some accounts describe long, heavy sleep after brutal labour. Others describe nights that felt endless. Both may be true, depending on weather workload and sheer luck. You begin to notice the smell of everything. Wet wool, wood smoke, animal hide, damp earth sealed beneath snow. These smells follow you into sleep, clinging to your clothes and hair. They are not unpleasant exactly, but they are constant. Even your dreams seem to smell like smoke and cold. There is another curious habit you learn about as the night deepens. In some areas, settlers placed heated stones near their bedding, wrapped in cloth to provide warmth through the first hours of sleep. It is a simple trick borrowed from older traditions, and it works until the stone cools. Then the cold creeps back in slow and patient, reminding you that warmth here is temporary. As you lie there, eyes half closed, you feel how sleep is shaped by fear, by planning, by hope. You think about morning before night has even fully arrived. Will the fire still be alive? Will the door open? Will the snow stop? These questions drift through your thoughts, not sharply, but like slow-moving clouds. The wind picks up slightly and you hear it searching for gaps. It slips through cracks, whispering against wood, making the walls feel thinner than they look. You pull whatever you have closer, a coat, a blanket, someone else's shoulder. You realize that winter sleep in the Wild West is rarely solitary by choice. Bodies cluster not for intimacy, but for heat. And yet there is a strange calm here too. Once the immediate tasks are done, once the fire is fed and the door secured, there is nothing left to do but rest. The snow has decided the pace. You are not going anywhere tonight. The world outside is paused, sealed, quiet. Inside that stillness your breathing slows, muscles loosen just a little. This first night teaches you the rule that will guide every night that follows. Sleep is not an escape from winter. It is part of how you endure it. You're not retreating from the cold. You're negotiating with it hour by hour, breath by breath. As your eyes finally close, you sense the town settling too. Fires dim, voices fade. Snow keeps falling, patient and indifferent. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but for now, you rest where you can wrapped in whatever warmth exists, learning the frontier truth that sleep itself is a fragile shelter. You wake without fully waking. The cold nudges you back toward awareness before your eyes open. Somewhere nearby, someone shifts wood, pops in the fire, and the wind presses again at the walls. This is how nights continue here, not in a clean break between sleep and morning, but in a slow rhythm of half rest and quiet alertness. When you finally sit up, the darkness still owns most of the sky. It feels like night has stretched itself longer than usual, swollen by snow and cloud. If you're travelling rather than settled, this night teaches you something even more basic. Shelter is not guaranteed. Many people crossing the west during winter found themselves sleeping wherever movement stopped. That might be a shallow depression dug into snow. It might be the lee side of a rock. It might be the narrow protection of a wagon stalled by drifts. Your body learns quickly that the ground steals heat faster than air. Lying directly on frozen earth drains warmth with quiet efficiency. A widely accepted historical fact sits at the centre of this experience. During winter crossings of the Great Plains and mountain passes, travellers often slept on top of saddles packs or coiled ropes to lift themselves off the snow. Even a few inches of separation made a measurable difference. This was not comfort in the modern sense, it was strategy. Sleep became a calculation balancing exhaustion against exposure. You feel that calculation in your bones now. When you lie down, the cold pushes back immediately. You tuck knees toward chest. You wrap fabric around your head, leaving just enough space to breathe. Breathing itself becomes deliberate, too shallow, and you feel air scraping your throat. Too deep and the cold bites harder. Every small adjustment matters. There's an odd little detail that appears in some winter travel accounts. People sometimes slept sitting upright, backs against a wagon wheel or rock to reduce surface contact with snow. It sounds awkward, And it is, but it reduces heat loss and keeps snow from drifting over your face. It also means sleep arrives in fragments, brief drops into unconsciousness, followed by sudden returns to awareness when muscles protest or balance shifts. As the night drags on, sound behaves strangely. Snow dampens everything, yet certain noises carry with startling clarity. A horse stamping, canvas snapping, the distant crack of ice shifting along a river. These sounds slip into your sleep and reshape it. Dreams feel closer to waking life, less symbolic, more literal. You dream of walking, of lifting, of pushing, because those motions dominate your days. People of the time notice this too. Journals mention dreams filled with work and weather, with very little imagination left for anything else. Mental energy narrows under stress. Sleep becomes practical. Even dreams seem to serve survival, rehearsing tasks, replaying routes, checking for mistakes. Historians still argue whether chronic cold exposure altered sleep depth for frontier travellers or simply shortened sleep duration. Some evidence suggests the body prioritises core warmth over extended rest, leading to lighter sleep. Other interpretations emphasise exhaustion as a powerful override, pulling people into deep sleep despite conditions. As with many aspects of frontier life, the answer likely depends on circumstance rather than rule. You become aware of another presence now. Moisture. Breath condenses and freezes along fabric edges. By morning, blankets and collars are stiff with frost. Some travellers learn to shake bedding violently before packing, sending a small cloud of ice crystals into the air. Others simply rolled it up as it was knowing it would thaw later maybe. There is a strangely clever habit mentioned in a few accounts. People sometimes slept with their face turned slightly downward, allowing moisture from breath to escape, rather than collect near nose and mouth. It reduced frost build-up and made breathing easier through the night. It is a small adjustment, but in this environment, small adjustments add up. Your body feels heavy yet alert. Muscles ache from holding heat. Fingers tingle as circulation fights back. You notice how hunger behaves differently in cold. It does not roar, it simmers. A steady reminder rather than a sharp demand. Sleep dulls it temporarily, but it returns quickly when you wake. Somewhere along the way, you learn that companionship changes everything. Sleeping near another person, even without touching, raises the temperature of the shared space. 2 bodies create a microclimate. 3 bodies create something closer to comfort. This is why people cluster without apology. Privacy becomes a luxury traded willingly for warmth. There is also fear woven quietly into these nights. Fear of storms intensifying. Fear of animals drawn by scent. Fear of not waking at all. Frontier writing sometimes mentions the unsettling stillness of someone who does not stir by morning. It is rare, but the possibility lingers in everyone's mind. You sleep knowing that cold is patient. It does not rush. It waits. And yet even here sleep comes. Not gracefully, not fully, but it comes. Your thoughts slow. The wind becomes background. Muscles release their tight hold just enough. The body, stubborn and remarkable, insists on rest even when conditions argue otherwise. By the time light begins to change, you are no longer sure how much you slept. Minutes blur into hours. You remember waking but not always falling asleep again. This uncertainty is part of the experience. Sleep on the winter trail is not measured in hours. It is measured in survival. Did you wake? Can you move? Are you warm enough to continue? As dawn finally presses pale light through cloud, you rise stiffly. Snow has reshaped the world again. Track softened, drifts higher. Night has taken its toll, but it has not defeated you. You gather yourself, shake ice from fabric, and prepare to move or to wait, depending on what the land allows. The lesson settles quietly. When snow buries the west, sleep becomes less about comfort and more about cooperation with your surroundings. You do not conquer the night. You endure it. You rest in pieces. You adapt. And somehow that is enough to keep going. By the third night, you begin to understand the strange relief of walls, even rough ones. A cabin, no matter how imperfect, feels like a promise. As you step inside, snow shaking from your shoulders, the air changes immediately. It smells of pine resin, old smoke, and damp wood. The wind still exists, but it has been pushed back, forced to argue with logs instead of skin. You close the door and feel the quiet thud echo through the small space, a sound that signals safety more than comfort. Frontier cabins were built quickly, often by people learning as they went. A well-known historical reality is that most log cabins in the Wild West lacked proper foundations and insulation. Logs were stacked, notched, and sealed with whatever material was available. Mud, clay, moss, animal hair, sometimes even scraps of cloth. This method, called chinking, helped to reduce drafts but rarely eliminated them. The cold always found a way in. You notice it immediately when you sit down. One side of the room feels warmer than the other. Heat pools near the fire and thins as it moves outward. The floor, made of packed earth or rough boards, pulls warmth from your feet. You learn to choose your sleeping spot carefully. Too close to the fire and sparks threaten. Too far and the cold claims you slowly. There's a small, almost humorous detail hidden in some settlers' letters. People sometimes slept with their heads toward the door rather than the fire. It seems backward, but it allowed them to monitor the most vulnerable point of the cabin. If snow piled too high, if the latch failed, if animals pushed against it, they would know. Sleep even indoors remains watchful. You lie down where you can, perhaps on a low platform, perhaps on the floor itself. Cabins rarely had separate rooms in early stages. Everything happens in one space. Cooking, eating, working, sleeping. At night the room transforms quietly. Tools lean against walls. Pots cool. The fire settles into a steady glow. Bodies arrange themselves in patterns learned quickly. Adults at the edges, children in the warmest centre. The bedding tells its own story. If there's a mattress at all, it is likely stuffed with straw corn husks or dried grass. These materials shift and compress, creating uneven support. They rustle softly when you move, a dry sound like paper. Many people choose to lay blankets directly on top of these mattresses, rather than between body and stuffing, finding it warmer that way. There is a curious fringe habit mentioned in a few winter cabin accounts. Some settlers sprinkled dried herbs or pine needles into bedding. Partly it helped deter insects. Partly it added a comforting scent that masked dampness. It also brought a reminder of forests and summer into the long nights, a small psychological comfort when the world outside felt hostile. As you settle in, you become aware of how light behaves inside a cabin. Firelight flickers unevenly, casting shadows that stretch and shrink along walls. Knots in the logs take on faces if you look too long. Sleep does not arrive instantly. Your mind wanders, tracing the grain of wood, listening to the fire breathe. Historians still argue whether frontier cabin design intentionally favoured heat retention over ventilation, or whether poor airflow was simply an accepted risk. Smoke inhalation was common. Chimneys were crude. Some cabins lacked chimneys entirely, relying on roof holes or open doors. The trade-off between warmth and breathable air was constant, and sleep happened inside that compromise. Your lungs feel the difference. The air is thicker here. Smoke stings the back of your throat. Eyes water slightly before adjusting. People learn to sleep low where air was clearer and to let smoke rise above them. It is another quiet skill passed along without ceremony. Sound inside the cabin becomes intimate. Every shift of fabric is audible. Someone coughs. Someone mutters in their sleep. The fire pops sharply now and then, sending a spark upward. These sounds weave together, creating a kind of night rhythm. You begin to recognize which noises matter and which do not. That knowledge helps sleep deepen just a little. Outside, the snow continues to fall. It presses against the cabin walls, adding a layer of insulation while also threatening collapse if it grows too heavy. You imagine the roof bearing that weight. Early cabins were often reinforced in winter with extra poles inside angled upward to support beams. This was not part of original design. It was adaptation learned the hard way. You drift closer to sleep now, comforted not by luxury but by predictability. The fire is steady. The door is shut. Bodies are near. Even the cold has become familiar. It no longer feels like an attack, more like a condition you've accepted. Dreams come more easily here. They are still shaped by daily labour, but they stretch a little further, reaching toward memory and hope. You might dream of spring water running, of open grass, of warmth that does not need tending. These dreams are not escapist. They are reminders of why you endure. As the night deepens, the cabin seems to shrink, drawing everyone inward. Breath clouds briefly, then fades. Muscles relax. Sleep claims more territory than it did on the trail. Not fully, not without interruption, but enough. You learn something important here. Shelter does not eliminate hardship, but it changes its shape. Inside these rough walls, winter sleep becomes possible in a way it never was under open sky. It is still fragile, still earned, but it is real. And as you lie there, wrapped in layers, listening to the fire's slow heartbeat, you understand that the cabin is not just a structure. It is a boundary, a thin line between human warmth and an indifferent world of snow. The fire becomes the center of everything now, even when you pretend it is not. You lie down with one eye half open, watching the way flames lean and settle, listening to the soft click and sigh of wood breaking down. Heat reaches you unevenly. Your face feels warm while your feet seem miles away, living in a different season altogether. You shift carefully because every movement rearranges the balance you have worked to create. People living on the winter frontier quickly learned that fire was a companion that demanded attention even while you slept. Accounts from the period consistently show that most households kept fires burning through the night during severe cold, not for comfort, but to prevent freezing and structural damage. Letting a fire die completely could mean frozen water containers by morning crack tools or worse. Sleep therefore included responsibility. You notice how smoke behaves differently at night. During the day, doors open and close, air circulates, and smoke escapes more easily. At night, everything seals up. The fire smoulders. Smoke thickens. It creeps along the ceiling before drifting downward. Your eyes sting at first, then adapt. Your breathing becomes shallower without you meaning to. This is not fear. It is instinct. One overlooked reality appears in winter cabin descriptions. Many people slept with their heads wrapped loosely in cloth, not just for warmth, but to filter smoke. Wool scarves and spare shirts served double duty. They softened the air and made it easier to rest without coughing yourself awake. It was a small concession to an environment that could not be fully controlled. As the hours pass, you become attuned to the sounds of combustion. A sharp crack means sap boiling out of wood. A low hiss suggests damp fuel. A sudden flare sends light racing across the walls, shadows jumping like startled animals. Each sound carries information. You may be asleep, but part of you remains on duty. Firelight reshapes the space. Walls breathe in and out as shadows move. The ceiling feels lower at night, pressed down by darkness and smoke. You imagine the roof beams above you holding snow that grows heavier with each hour. The fire does not just warm, it reassures. As long as it burns, the night feels manageable. There is a practical detail that surprises many people. Frontier families often banked fires before sleeping, pulling hot coals together and covering them lightly with ash. This slowed combustion and stretched heat through the night. It also reduced sparks, making sleep safer. This simple technique appears again and again in household notes and letters, a quiet domestic skill passed along without ceremony. Even so, danger lingered. Fires escaped. Chimneys clogged. Sparks found dry wood. Nighttime fires were feared because sleep dulled response. People slept lightly for this reason, waking at unfamiliar smells or changes in sound. The nose often detected trouble before the eyes did. Smoke that smelled wrong could pull you upright instantly. Interpretations still differ on how often cabin fires cause nighttime accidents versus daytime ones. Some records emphasize nighttime vulnerability. Others point out that cooking mishaps during busy daylight hours were equally dangerous. What remains clear is that fire was never fully trusted. It was respected, negotiated with, and monitored even in rest. You feel the air dry as the fire works. Skin tightens, lips crack slightly. The cold outside steals moisture from everything inside. You lick your lips unconsciously and turn your face away from the hottest draft. Sleep arrives in waves, shallow but persistent. There is another small habit that shows up in winter recollections. People placed metal objects near the fire not to heat rooms but to warm themselves later. A pan, a horseshoe, a tool head. These items retained heat longer than stone and could be moved closer to bedding after the flames settled. It was an improvised heat source that did not require feeding. The smell of smoke seeps into everything. Hair, blankets, skin, even dreams seem tinted by it. You dream of glowing embers, of walking through forests where trees exhale warmth. The line between waking and sleeping blurs as firelight pulses behind closed eyelids. At some point in the night, someone rises quietly. You hear the careful step, the pause, the soft clink of iron. A log is shifted, embers stirred. The fire responds with a brief brightening, then calms again. No words are exchanged. This is understood. Tending the fire is not a chore assigned. It rotates naturally among whoever wakes first. You drift back under, reassured by the sound. The fire's rhythm syncs with your breathing. Inhale, exhale, crackle, settle. Outside, the storm continues its work, but it feels farther away now, muffled by walls and warmth. There is a strange comfort in the knowledge that smoke marks survival. Clean air would be pleasant, but it would mean no fire. Here discomfort signals life. You accept the trade without thinking too hard about it. As morning inches closer, the fire grows weaker. Heat thins. Cold seeps back, testing your resolve. You pull fabric closer, curl tighter, delay waking as long as possible. Sleep at this hour becomes fragile again, easily broken by stiffness or chill. When light finally begins to shift, you open your eyes to a room changed subtly by the night. Ash has settled. Logs have collapsed inward. Smoke has left its trace along beams. You smell yourself, and know this scent will follow you for days. The lesson settles quietly. Winter sleep in the Wild West is shaped by fire in all its moods. Warmth and danger share the same source. Rest depends on listening, adjusting, and respecting a force that never truly sleeps. You rise knowing that tonight, when darkness returns, the fire will again decide how deeply you rest. By now, you've learned to look at bedding with a practical eye. What once seemed secondary now feels essential. You kneel and run your hand across what passes for a bed, noticing texture, before softness, thickness, before comfort. Sleep here is shaped as much by what lies beneath you as by what covers you. The ground never stops trying to steal heat, and bedding is your first line of resistance. Surviving descriptions from frontier households make one thing clear. Proper mattresses were uncommon luxuries. Most people slept on makeshift layers assembled from whatever could be found locally. Straw-dried grasses, corn husks, even leaves were packed into ticking made from cloth or sacks. These fillings shifted constantly, forming ridges and hollows that pressed into hips and shoulders. It was not restful by modern standards, but it was warmer than bare boards. You lie down and feel the unevenness immediately. One hip sinks lower than the other. A shoulder meets resistance where stuffing has thinned. You adjust instinctively, rolling, tugging, folding fabric until pressure eases slightly. This process repeats throughout the night. Sleep here is not still. It is negotiated through constant micro-movements. There is a lesser-known detail that appears in winter journals. Some settlers preferred fir boughs layered beneath bedding. The branches provided spring and insulation, and the scent offered a faint reminder of living forest beneath snow. Needles poked through fabric, occasionally sharp but manageable. Many considered this preferable to straw, which flattened quickly and trapped moisture. Blankets tell another story of necessity. Wool dominates, heavy and coarse, scratchy against skin but unmatched in heat retention, even when damp. You feel its weight press you downward, anchoring you in place. Lighter blankets might be layered on top, but wool stays closest to the body. It smells faintly of lanolin and smoke, a scent that becomes synonymous with night itself. Some people slept beneath animal skins, hides cured unevenly and stiffened by cold. These trapped heat effectively but did not breathe well. Condensation formed beneath them, leaving clothing damp by morning. It was a trade many accepted willingly. Dry discomfort felt easier to manage than freezing air. Researchers examining household inventories from frontier regions note that bedding often represented one of the most valuable possessions a family owned. It travelled with them, was mended repeatedly and passed down. A good blanket might outlast furniture. This explains the care you see now, the way blankets are shaken, folded and placed deliberately before sleep. You notice how bedding arrangements reflect hierarchy without discussion. Children are given the warmest layers. The elderly are positioned closest to the fire. Adults adapt around them. This quiet prioritization appears consistently in personal letters. Warmth is allocated where it matters most without debate. Interpretations still vary on how much bedding quality influenced survival rates during severe winters. Some historians emphasize shelter and fire as decisive factors. Others point to bedding as equally critical, especially for children and the sick. The truth likely lies in combination. Bedding alone cannot save you, but poor bedding can hasten decline. There is an odd workaround that surfaces in scattered accounts. People stuffed spare clothing inside pillowcases to create extra insulation beneath their torsos. Coats, shirts, and trousers became padding by night, clothing again by day. It was not elegant, but it reduced heat loss where it mattered most. You feel how sound changes when bedding shifts. Straw whispers, fabric scrapes softly. The movement is quiet enough not to wake others, yet loud enough to remind you that sleep is shared. You grow careful, learning which motions cause least disturbance. This awareness becomes second nature. Moisture remains an enemy. Snow tracked indoors melts, dampening bedding edges. Breath condenses and settles into fibres. Over time, bedding grows heavier. In prolonged cold spells, some families dried bedding by day over chairs near the fire, rotating pieces carefully to avoid scorching. This daily ritual shaped evenings and mornings alike. As you settle in, the bed holds you just enough to allow rest. It is not inviting, it is functional. Your body accepts this, adjusting expectations downward. Muscles relax not because conditions are ideal, but because resistance wastes energy. Dreams arrive differently here. You dream of texture and weight, of sinking, of warmth pressing back against you. The body wrapped tightly sends signals of containment that the mind interprets as safety. Even discomfort becomes familiar, and familiarity breeds calm. At some point you wake with numbness creeping along an arm or leg. You shift, restoring circulation with a brief sting. This happens repeatedly through the night. It is not alarming, it is routine. Everyone understands this rhythm. By morning, bedding tells the story of the night. Impressions remain. Straw is displaced. Blankets are twisted and compacted. You shake them out, sending dust motes and dry fragments into the air. The bed resets, ready to repeat its role tonight. The lesson settles quietly as you rise. In winter, buried west beds are not built for indulgence. They are built for endurance. Sleep happens not because conditions are gentle, but because the body adapts. Wrapped in layers of necessity, you rest just enough to face another cold day. You learn quickly that clothing never really leaves you at night. It simply changes purpose. What protected you from wind and labour during the day becomes your bedding after dark. You peel off nothing unless it is wet, and even then you hesitate weighing the cold air against the damp fabric. Sleep here does not begin with undressing. It begins with deciding what you can afford to remove. Most frontier accounts describe people sleeping in nearly all of their daytime clothing during winter. Shirts, trousers, socks, vests, even coats stayed on. This was not laziness, it was insulation. Fabric trapped air. Air trapped heat. Every layer added a thin barrier between skin and cold. Pyjamas as a separate concept belong to wealth and stability, not to snowbound settlements. You lie back and feel the stiffness of work clothes resist you. Seams press into skin. Buttons dig lightly when you turn. Leather belts feel unforgiving until you loosen them just enough. Comfort is secondary to function. You make small adjustments, tucking fabric where drafts sneak in, pulling cuffs down over wrists, drawing collars up around ears. There is a detail that often surprises modern readers. Many people slept with hats on. Wool caps, fur hats, even scarves tied around the head stayed in place all night. Heat escapes rapidly through the head, and settlers noticed this long before science explained it. Covering your head can be the difference between restless shivering and shallow rest. As you settle, you feel how layers interact. Wool against cotton against skin. Some combinations itch, others soothe. You learn your preferences quickly because you will repeat them night after night. The body remembers what worked and reaches for it without thought. Personal letters from the period often mentioned socks as a point of anxiety. Wet socks meant cold feet all night. Dry socks were guarded carefully. Some people slept with an extra pair tucked into their clothing, warming them with body heat so they could be swapped during the night. This small habit brought disproportionate relief. There is an odd improvisation that appears in winter recollections. People sometimes wrapped spare fabric around their midsection, creating a makeshift abdominal warmer. The core mattered most. If your torso stayed warm, arms and legs followed. This practice echoes techniques used in colder regions around the world, adapted here through necessity rather than tradition. You notice how sleep posture changes when you are layered heavily. Curling becomes natural, knees draw upward, arms fold inward. The body reduces surface area instinctively. Stretching out feels risky, exposing too much skin to drafts. You remain compact, a human bundle. Interpretations differ on whether sleeping fully clothed increased or reduced sleep quality. Some researchers suggest restricted movement led to more frequent waking. Others argue the warmth gained outweighed discomfort. Judging by repeated mentions in diaries, people accepted the trade. Warmth came first, rest followed where it could. As the night deepens, you become aware of subtle sounds made by fabric. Wool rasping softly, cotton whispering. These sounds replace the rustle of blankets. They become part of the night's texture, familiar enough to fade into background. Clothing also carries scent into sleep. Sweat from the day, smoke from fires, leather, animal. These smells are not unpleasant here. They are reassuring. They signal that the clothes have done their job, that you're still alive to smell them. There is another practical habit that emerges in colder stretches. People loosened clothing slightly before sleep, allowing circulation to improve. Tight garments restricted blood flow, increasing cold sensation. A loosened collar or waistband could make the difference between numbness and tolerable warmth. It is a detail learned through experience rather than instruction. You wake briefly when fabric shifts. A sleeve rides up. Cold air touches skin. You correct it without fully opening your eyes. These micro-awakenings happen often. They do not feel like interruptions. They feel like maintenance. At some point, moisture becomes noticeable. Breath dampens scarves. Perspiration cools under layers. You must balance sweating against freezing. Too many layers trap moisture. Too few invite cold. The balance changes hour by hour as the fire wanes and night deepens. Some settlers wrote about removing one outer layer midway through the night to prevent chilling from dampness. It sounds counterintuitive, but it worked. A slightly cooler but drier state proved more comfortable than soaked warmth that turned icy by morning. Your dreams reflect this bundled state. You dream of being wrapped, of carrying weight, of moving through resistance. The body's sensations shape the mind's imagery. There is no sense of nakedness or exposure. Even in sleep you remain armoured. Morning arrives slowly. When you finally rise, you feel stiff joints reluctant to move after hours confined by layers. But you are warm enough to stand. Your clothing already on gives you a head start on the day. There is no shock of dressing in freezing air. This alone makes the practice worthwhile. You shake out sleeves, stamp feet, restore circulation. The clothes remember your shape creased by night. They are ready to work again. Sleep has flowed directly into waking without a clean break. The lesson becomes clear. In a snow-buried west, clothing is not separate from rest. It is rest. It is bedding, insulation and security woven together. Sleep does not ask you to shed your defences. It asks you to adapt them. As you move toward another cold day, you understand that nighttime and daytime have merged into a continuous negotiation with the environment. You wear your survival with you even into sleep, and somehow that constancy makes rest possible. The wind announces itself long before you see its effects. It finds seams, knots, and corners pressing its way through with patient persistence. As you lie still, you hear it first as a faint whistle, then as a low moan that rises and falls. The cabin answers with creaks and soft complaints, wood shifting under stress. Even asleep, you sense the building breathing around you. Most early frontier cabins were never meant to be airtight. They were constructed quickly, often with green logs that shrank as they dried. Over time, gaps widened. Cold air slipped through, no matter how carefully chinking was applied. Winter magnified every imperfection. What felt like a solid wall in summer became a sieve when the temperature dropped. You feel the drafts as narrow streams of cold tracing along skin, ankles, wrists, the small hollow at the base of your neck. You learn to identify these vulnerable spots instantly. Without opening your eyes, you adjust fabric tuck edges tighter or roll just enough to block the flow with your body. A detail hiding in personal correspondence offers a glimpse of everyday ingenuity. People sometimes hung spare clothing or sacks along the inside walls, creating a second layer that slowed air movement. It was not insulation in the modern sense, but it softened the bite of wind and reduced noise. These hanging fabrics also absorbed moisture, changing the cabin's smell subtly through the night. Sound behaves differently when wind is involved. A gust pushes against one wall, then slides along another. The cabin answers with groans and taps. Loose shutters rattle gently, nails flex. The building seems restless, as if trying to settle into the cold but never quite managing it. You discover that sleep adapts to this constant motion. Instead of startling you awake, familiar noises begin to blend together. The whistle becomes a lullaby of sorts, irregular but predictable. Your mind learns which sounds matter and which are simply weather announcing itself. Some accounts suggest that settlers slept with small objects placed near draft points, a rolled cloth, a wedge of wood, even a boot pressed against a gap. These makeshift barriers could be adjusted without fully waking. It was a way of sealing leaks on demand, responding to the night as it shifted. Looking closer, the historical record grows less certain about how effective these measures really were. Some descriptions emphasize bitter cold indoors despite every effort. Others describe nights that felt surprisingly tolerable. The difference likely lay in craftsmanship, weather severity, and sheer luck. No two cabins behaved exactly the same. You notice how wind affects temperature unevenly. One side of your body feels chilled while the other remains warm. This asymmetry forces movement. You rotate, you curl, you reposition blankets and limbs. Sleep becomes dynamic, a slow dance with air currents. The smell of the cabin changes as wind passes through. Fresh cold air carries faint outdoor scents. Snow, pine, earth sealed under frost. These scents mix with smoke and fabric, creating a layered atmosphere that feels distinctly wintered. Breathing it in feels bracing and calming at once. There's a subtle emotional effect too. Wind outside amplifies the sense of enclosure inside. You become more aware of walls, roof and floor. The cabin feels smaller but also more protective. The harder the wind presses, the more valuable shelter feels. In some regions, people angled beds or bedding deliberately away from prevailing winds. Knowledge of local weather patterns shaped interior arrangements. Beds were placed where drafts were weakest, not where light was best. This spatial awareness became instinctive, passed along quietly. Interpretations diverge when it comes to how much wind disrupted sleep versus simply becoming background noise. Some observers emphasize constant waking and discomfort. Others describe deep rest once familiarity set in. What seems clear is that the body learned quickly. Wind did not defeat sleep, it reshaped it. At some point in the night, the wind eases slightly. The cabin settles. The sounds soften. You feel the change even before you consciously register it. Muscles loosen. Breathing deepens. The body takes advantage of every lull. When the wind surges again, you barely stir. Your body has learned the pattern. This adaptation feels like progress, a quiet sign that you are no longer new to winter here. The environment has not changed. You have. Morning will bring the evidence of the night's work. Snow drifted against walls, frost outlining seams. But for now you remain wrapped in layers, listening without listening, resting within a structure that holds just long enough. The lesson settles gently. Wind is not an interruption to winter sleep on the frontier. It is part of it. It shapes sound, temperature and rhythm. Once you stop fighting it, sleep finds a way to flow around its presence like snow around a fence. You become aware of warmth before you fully register bodies. It arrives as a steady presence, softer than fire, heat, slower, more forgiving. As you shift in the dark, an elbow brushes your side, a shoulder presses gently against your back. There is no apology. There does not need to be one. Shared sleep here is understood, agreed upon without words. In many frontier households, especially during winter, entire families slept in the same bed or clustered together on the floor. Space was limited, fuel was precious, and bodies produced heat more reliably than any stove. This arrangement was not considered unusual. It was practical. Warmth multiplied when people stayed close. You find your place instinctively. Children are tucked between adults, their smaller bodies shielded from drafts. Older family members are placed where the fire's warmth reaches most evenly. You adjust yourself around them, careful not to disturb the fragile balance. Sleep becomes a communal effort, each person contributing simply by being present. One small observation slips through personal letters written during harsh winters. Parents often mention checking children's hands and feet during the night, feeling for warmth without waking them. A cold hand might prompt a quiet rearrangement, a blanket pulled closer, a body shifted inward. These movements happened in near silence, practiced and gentle. The closeness changes how you sleep. Your movements become smaller. Turning requires awareness. You learn to wake just enough to adjust without fully rising. This lightness carries into dreams. You dream less of movement and more of stillness, of being held in place by warmth and weight. Sound behaves differently in shared sleep. Breathing overlaps. One person's sigh blends into another's exhale. The room fills with a soft, uneven rhythm that feels almost oceanic. These sounds anchor you. Alone, every noise might trigger alertness. Together, the same noises reassure. There's a detail that rarely appears in official records but shows up in passing remarks. People sometimes synchronize sleep positions to reduce gaps. Backs aligned, knees nested, feet overlapped. It was not planned formally. It evolved through repetition night after night until everyone knew where to settle. The question of privacy barely enters your mind. Modern ideas about personal space feel distant here. Survival reshapes priorities. Privacy yields easily to warmth. Emotional comfort comes from proximity, not isolation. Sleep feels safer when you're not the only one listening to the night. Accounts differ when describing how children experience these arrangements. Some recollections emphasize comfort and security. Others hint at restlessness and crowding. Memory softens hardship over time, and childhood recollections are especially malleable. What remains consistent is the acknowledgement that shared sleep was normal, expected, and necessary. You notice how temperature stabilizes when bodies cluster. Cold pockets disappear. Drafts lose their edge. The air around you feels denser, warmed by breath and skin. Even the fire seems less urgent now, allowed to settle into a lower, safer glow. There is an emotional shift too. Shared sleep brings a sense of continuity. You're part of a unit enduring the same conditions. This shared experience dulls fear. Wind and snow feel less threatening when filtered through collective presence. One overlooked habit appears in winter anecdotes. Families sometimes rotated sleeping positions through the night so no one remained on the cold edge for too long. A quiet shift here. A gentle nudge there. It was fairness practiced without ceremony, ensuring everyone endured and rested equally. You wake briefly to someone adjusting a blanket. The movement is familiar, almost expected. You relax into it, trusting the hands that move fabric around you. This trust deepens rest. The body feels protected not just by shelter, but by people. As the night stretches on, shared sleep creates its own microclimate. Moisture rises and settles. Breath fogs briefly before warming the air enough to clear. The smell of wool and skin blends into something neutral and steady. It becomes the scent of safety. There is no single agreed explanation among historians for how shared sleeping affected long-term health on the frontier. Some suggest reduced illness through warmth. Others point to the spread of sickness in close quarters. Evidence supports both views. What is clear is that people accepted the trade without much choice. Cold was the immediate enemy. Illness was a distant risk. Your dreams feel quieter now, less jagged. The presence of others smooths their edges. You dream of enclosed spaces of hands resting nearby, of warmth holding steady through the night. When you stir, you do not feel alone. That matters more than you might have expected. Morning approaches gradually. Light shifts behind closed eyes. Bodies stir one by one. Someone stretches carefully, mindful of limbs tangled together. Sleep releases its grip reluctantly, like warmth slowly fading when the fire dies. As you rise, the shared bed dissolves back into individuals. People separate, shake out blankets, rub stiffness from joints. Yet the memory of closeness lingers. It will shape how tonight feels before it even begins. The lesson settles gently. In a snow-buried west, sleep is rarely solitary. Warmth is multiplied through proximity. Rest is negotiated together. You do not endure winter alone. You endure it side by side, breathing in time, carrying one another through the cold hours. The air in a snowbound mining camp feels heavier the moment you step inside. It carries layers of scent that cling to your clothes and follow you into sleep. Sweat that never fully dried. Coal dust ground fine by boots, damp wool, metal. You lie down already tired, not just from the day's labour, but from the constant closeness of other people and the noise that never quite disappears. Winter drives miners together whether they like it or not. When snow seals roads and freezes supply lines, camps become islands. Bunkhouses fill beyond their intended capacity. Men sleep shoulder to shoulder on rough platforms stacked like cordwood. This arrangement appears again and again in payroll logs and camp descriptions from the period. It was cheaper to heat one large space than many small ones, and efficiency mattered more than comfort. You find a spot where you can. There is no ceremony. Someone gestures, someone shifts, you climb into place. The wooden plank beneath you is hard and unforgiving, but the warmth radiating from bodies on either side softens its edge. Blankets overlap without ownership. You pull what you need and accept the rest as shared. Sound defines sleep here. Even at night, the camp never truly rests. Someone coughs deeply, the kind of cough that seems to come from stone-lined lungs. Someone snores steady and unstoppable. Boots scrape as a late arrival searches for space. Outside, wind rattles loose boards and snow slides from roofs in heavy sighs. Despite this, exhaustion works in your favour. After hours underground, muscles surrender quickly. Sleep takes you not gently but forcefully, as if pulled downward. You sink into it before discomfort has time to argue. A small but telling detail appears in camp recollections. Many miners slept with their hats pulled low over their eyes, not just for warmth but to block light. Lamps were rarely extinguished completely. Someone was always awake tending fire, watching equipment, or nursing an injury. Darkness came in degrees, not absolutes. The proximity changes how your body reacts. You stop flinching at every sound. Familiar noises fade into a constant background. Only changes register. A sudden silence, a shout, the scrape of a chair. This selective listening allows deeper rest than you might expect. Food plays a quiet role in how sleep feels here. Heavy meals rich in fat and starch were common in mining camps, especially in winter. Salt pork, beans, bread. These foods sit heavy in the stomach, slowing digestion and encouraging drowsiness. Sleep arrives thick and dense even if it is not peaceful. There is an overlooked practice mentioned in some camp notes. Miners sometimes slept with tools nearby, not out of fear of theft alone, but because cold metal absorbed heat quickly. Keeping tools close to the body overnight made them easier to handle in the morning. Frozen iron could tear skin. Warmed metal felt safer. Accounts from different camps paint uneven pictures of rest. Some describe nights of uninterrupted sleep once lights dimmed. Others recall frequent waking due to noise pain or lingering tension. These contradictions suggest that conditions varied widely. Camp size, leadership, and weather all played roles. No single experience defines them all. You notice how sleep posture adapts to crowding. Turning requires negotiation. You move in small increments, pausing to avoid elbows and knees. Eventually you find a position that holds. It may not be ideal, but it remains stable long enough for rest to deepen. The smell of the camp seeps into dreams. You dream of tunnels of weight pressing overhead, of narrow spaces warmed by bodies. Even asleep, your mind does not stray far from waking life. This is common in environments where work dominates thought. There is a quiet social contract at play. Loud complaints are rare. Everyone understands that conditions are shared. Discomfort becomes collective and therefore easier to bear. Humour surfaces in the morning, not at night. Night belongs to endurance. Some observers have questioned whether such crowded sleeping conditions contributed to illness. Others argue that the warmth provided protection against cold-related ailments. The truth likely lies between. Warmth helped in the short term. Proximity carried long-term risk. Faced with winter, miners chose the immediate advantage. You wake briefly when someone rises early for a shift change. Cold rushes into the space they leave behind. You feel it instantly, a sharp reminder of how much heat bodies contribute. Another sleeper shifts closer, sealing the gap. The cold retreats. As hours pass, the noise thins. Snoring becomes irregular. Coughs space out. Even the camp seems to breathe more slowly. Snow continues to pile outside, thickening walls and muffling sound further. The world beyond the bunkhouse feels distant and unreal. When morning finally approaches, sleep loosens reluctantly. Muscles protest. Lungs feel tight. Eyes sting with coal dust. You rise slowly, stepping around limbs and blankets, careful not to wake those still resting. The day will demand strength again soon. Looking back, you realize something quietly surprising. Despite the crowding, despite the noise, despite the lack of privacy, you slept. Not beautifully, not deeply, but enough. Enough to stand, enough to work, enough to repeat the cycle. The lesson settles in as you pull on boots and reach for the door. In snowbound mining camps, sleep is less about peace and more about momentum. It keeps bodies moving through winter. It carries people forward one night at a time, bound together by necessity and fatigue. The ranch feels different at night, especially in winter. Space stretches outward instead of closing in. When you lie down, there is no crowd pressing warmth toward you, no wall of bodies holding heat in place. Instead, there is distance. Distance between buildings, distance between sounds, distance between you and anyone who might hear if something goes wrong. You settle into sleep knowing that isolation here is not poetic. It is practical and demanding. Ranch houses were often set far apart to accommodate grazing land, which meant that winter nights were spent largely alone or with only one or two others nearby. Snow amplified that separation, filling tracks and erasing paths until the world felt wider and emptier than before. Inside the room is quieter than any bunkhouse. The silence has weight. You hear the smallest things: a mouse in the wall, ice forming in a bucket, wood contracting with a sharp snap. These sounds feel closer in the absence of human noise. Your senses stretch outward, filling the quiet with attention. You sleep lightly at first, not because you are cold, though the temperature drops steadily as the fire settles, but because vigilance has become habit. Ranchers learn to rest without fully surrendering awareness. Livestock nearby meant responsibility. A startled horse, a restless cow, a predator drawn close by scent or weakness. These possibilities drift through your thoughts as you close your eyes. Beds here are often simpler than in towns. A narrow frame, a thin mattress, sometimes just a low platform with blankets layered thickly. Space allows for this simplicity. There is no need to compress bodies together. Warmth comes from fire and clothing rather than proximity. You notice how your breathing sounds louder in the quiet. Each inhale feels deliberate. Each exhale hangs in the air for a moment before fading. This rhythm becomes grounding. Without the noise of others, you become more aware of your own body, its aches, its stiffness, its steady persistence. One habit emerges naturally in such places. People position themselves to face the door even in sleep. It was not fear-driven, it was readiness. Facing the door allowed quicker response if something demanded attention. Over time, this orientation became instinctive, shaping how beds were placed and how bodies settled. Outside, the land speaks in muted tones. Wind slides across open ground with a low hiss. Snow drifts against fences with a soft scrape. Occasionally an animal calls out, distant and brief. These sounds travel farther in open space, reaching you even through closed walls. You notice that sleep comes in cycles. Short rests followed by brief waking moments. You check the fire, listen, adjust a blanket, then drift again. This pattern repeats until dawn. Feels inefficient, yet it works. The body gathers rest in pieces, assembling enough energy to function. There is a quiet emotional texture to these nights. Loneliness appears, but it is not sharp. It is spacious. It gives room for thought. You find your mind wandering through memories, through plans, through imagined futures when winter loosens its grip. Sleep carries these thoughts gently rather than cutting them off. Some nights the cold presses harder. Frost creeps along window edges, breath fogs even indoors. You add another layer, pull fabric higher, curl tighter. The room grows smaller as you conserve heat shrinking inward around your body. Dreams here feel wide and slow. You dream of open land under snow, of stars sharp against black sky, of movement measured and deliberate. There is little chaos in these dreams. They mirror the stillness around you. When you wake suddenly, it is often to silence rather than sound. Silence itself becomes a signal. You lie still listening for confirmation that nothing is wrong. Eventually familiarity reassures you. The silence holds. You let yourself sink back. Morning comes quietly. Light seeps through frost-rimmed glass. The fire is nearly gone. Cold has reclaimed much of the room. You rise slowly, joint stiff breath visible. Outside, snow stretches unbroken in every direction. You step into boots already cold, pull on layers and open the door. The world waits unchanged by your rest. Animals stir, steam rises from nostrils. Another day begins shaped by the same demands as the last. As you move forward, the lesson settles gently. On isolated ranches, sleep is not softened by company. It is steadied by routine and awareness. Rest does not mean disengagement. It means pausing just long enough to continue. You carry that understanding with you as the day unfolds, knowing that tonight will ask the same of you again. You notice the difference before anyone explains it. The cold feels organized here, not conquered, but understood. As you settle down for the night, the arrangement of space makes sense in a quiet way. Where you sleep is chosen with care. The ground beneath you is prepared. The air around you is guided rather than fought. Winter is present, but it no longer feels like an ambush. Indigenous communities across the West carried generations of winter knowledge that shaped how nights were spent. Long before settlers arrived, people had learned how to sleep in ways that worked with snow, wind and cold rather than against them. You sense this immediately in the calm efficiency of the setup. Nothing is accidental, nothing is wasted. You lower yourself onto bedding placed deliberately above the ground. Sometimes it is a raised platform, sometimes it's a thick layer of natural material laid with intention. The earth is respected for its cold, not trusted. Separation matters. Even a small lift changes how heat stays with the body. The materials around you feel alive in a different way. Animal skins are arranged fur-side inward, trapping warmth while allowing moisture to escape. Plant fibers are layered to create airflow without drafts. Everything smells faintly of earth and smoke, grounding rather than harsh. One detail becomes clear as you settle in. Orientation matters. Sleeping positions align with prevailing winds, entrances and fire placement. The space feels tuned. When wind shifts, its effect is softened. When temperatures drop, warmth lingers where it is needed most. You notice how little movement is required. Once settled, the body rests deeply. There is no constant adjusting, no restless shifting. Sleep arrives smoothly, carried by familiarity rather than exhaustion. This ease stands out after nights spent negotiating cold inch by inch. Children sleep easily here. Their breathing is steady. They are wrapped securely but not heavily. Elders rest nearby, positioned where warmth and airflow balance best. The arrangement reflects care shaped by experience refined over countless winters. There is a subtle habit you observe without ceremony. Before sleep, people tend to their surroundings quietly. Bedding is checked. Openings are adjusted. Fire is set to burn at a steady pace rather than flare and fade. These actions are unhurried, confident, practiced. Knowledge here is not written. It lives in repetition, in watching, in doing. You realize that this approach to sleep is not improvised for survival. It is cultural memory enacted nightly. The night itself feels different. Wind moves past rather than through. Snow piles where expected. Sounds soften instead of startling. You rest without listening for danger at every breath. Alertness relaxes into awareness. There are moments when you become aware of how settlers misunderstood these practices. Some dismissed them as primitive or temporary. Others adopted them quietly once winter proved relentless. Over time, elements of indigenous winter sleep filtered into frontier life, often without acknowledgement. Sleep deepens. Dreams come gently. They feel anchored, less jagged than before. The body trusts the arrangement. Muscles release. Breathing slows naturally. There's no need to guard against drafts or sudden cold. You wake briefly, not from discomfort, but from habit. The space remains steady. Nothing needs adjusting. You return to rest, easily surprised by how seamless the transition feels. Morning arrives without shock. The cold is still present, but it feels expected rather than cruel. You rise without stiffness that plagued earlier nights. Warmth lingers in joints and core. As you step outside, snow lies deep and quiet. The night has passed without struggle. That alone feels instructive. You carry the lesson with you even if you do not name it. The understanding settles slowly. Sleeping well in winter is not about resisting the environment. It is about reading it, respecting it, letting knowledge accumulated over generations guide how you rest. Tonight, wherever you sleep next, part of you will remember this. The careful placement, the calm preparation, the sense that winter can be lived with, not merely endured. The wagon feels smaller at night than it ever did during the day. Snow piles against the wheels, muffling the world outside while canvas tightens and loosens with the cold. When you climb inside, the space accepts you, reluctantly forcing you to curl and adapt. There is no room to stretch. Every inch is already claimed by supplies, tools, and the quiet hope that morning will come without disaster. You arrange yourself carefully. The floor is hard and unyielding, so you build a thin barrier between your body and the wood. Blankets spare clothing, sacks of grain. Anything that lifts you even slightly matters. The wagon box traps some warmth, but it also traps moisture. Breath fogs quickly, then settles. The air feels close, but safer than the open snow. Travel accounts from winter crossings mention wagons becoming temporary shelters when storms closed in. Movement stopped not by choice, but by necessity. People slept where they halted, sometimes for days. The wagon transformed from transport into refuge, imperfect but essential. You notice how sound behaves inside the canvas walls. Wind presses and releases, making the fabric sigh. Snow slides down the sides in soft avalanches. Occasionally a stronger gust snaps the canvas taut, sending a shiver through the frame. These sounds blend into a steady rhythm that follows you into sleep. There is a small practice that appears quietly in diaries. People often parked wagons with their rear facing the wind, using the bulk of the structure as a shield. Canvas flaps were secured tightly, sometimes reinforced with additional fabric or hides. Orientation mattered. A few degrees could mean the difference between tolerable cold and relentless drafts. Sleep comes in short segments here. Knees press into chest, shoulders rest against walls. Turning requires thought. You wake when circulation fades and adjust careful not to disturb whatever fragile warmth you have created. It is not uncomfortable in a sharp way, it is restrictive like resting inside a shell. You share the space with others if you're not alone. Children are tucked into the warmest corner. Adults take the edges. Bodies overlap slightly, not enough to crowd, but enough to share heat. The wagon becomes a small island of warmth surrounded by an endless white sea. The smell inside is layered. Canvas, leather, damp wool, food stores, animal. These scents feel concentrated, intensified by the lack of airflow. They become familiar quickly. Familiarity breeds calm. At times the cold presses harder. Frost forms along the interior frame, your breath crystals on fabric edges. You pull coverings closer, reducing movement further. The wagon seems to shrink as the night deepens, drawing everyone inward. There are moments when sleep feels surprisingly deep. Exhaustion does its work. The mind, reassured by enclosure, releases its grip. You drift, held in place by narrow walls and steady sounds. Dreams are compact like the space itself. Short scenes, close perspectives, little distance. Some travellers wrote about waking to silence that felt unnatural. Snow had buried the wagon so completely that sound could not penetrate. In these moments, orientation became difficult. Up and down felt confused. People lay still, listening for confirmation that the world still existed beyond the canvas. When movement resumes, it is cautious. Someone shifts testing space. Someone checks a flap. Cold rushes briefly inside, sharp and immediate, then retreats as fabric closes again. You learn to tolerate these intrusions, knowing they will pass. Morning arrives slowly. Light filters through canvas, diffused and pale. The wagon creaks as snow shifts. Bodies stir reluctantly. Stiffness sets in from cramped positions. You unfold yourself, carefully, joints protesting after hours confined. When you step outside, the scale of the night's work becomes clear. Drifts rise higher than wheels, tracks have vanished. The wagon sits half buried, a small dark shape in an ocean of white. Sleep kept you alive here, nothing more and nothing less. As you stretch and breathe cold air deeply, the lesson settles. Wagons were never meant to be homes, yet winter forced them into that role. Sleep inside them was narrow, constrained and imperfect, but it worked well enough. You gather yourself for the day ahead, knowing that tonight may bring the same arrangement again. The wagon waits, patient and silent, ready to shelter you once more when movement becomes impossible. You smell them before you see them. Warm, earthy, unmistakably alive. The animals settle nearby with a patience that comes from routine, not affection. They have done this before. When you lie down for the night, the heat you feel does not come from flame or fabric alone. It comes from breathing bodies that radiate warmth steadily without flicker or smoke. On many winter nights, people slept as close to livestock as space and safety allowed. Not out of sentiment, but because animals produced reliable heat. Barns, sheds, and even attached lean-tos became sleeping spaces when temperatures dropped hard enough. A horse's body gives off more warmth than you expect, a cow even more. You feel it rising slowly, filling the enclosed air like water finding its level. You choose your position carefully. Too close brings risk. A startled kick, a shifting weight. Too far wastes the advantage. You find the middle ground, resting where warmth reaches you without demanding trust you cannot afford. The ground beneath you is packed and cold, but the air above it feels softer, less sharp. The sounds are constant and strangely calming. Chewing, snorting, the slow rhythm of breath moving in large lungs. These noises form a steady backdrop that makes silence feel unnecessary. You fall asleep to them the way someone else might fall asleep to rain. There is a particular quality to animal warmth. It is not sudden, it does not surge, it builds gradually and holds. Even when you wake briefly, the heat remains dependable and unhurried. You tuck yourself closer, careful not to disturb the balance. You notice how the smell changes your sense of cold. The sharpness dulls. The air feels thicker, heavier with life. Straw and hay absorb moisture, keeping the ground from leaching heat too quickly. You shift slightly, pressing down into it, letting your body settle into the shallow depression you create. Animals sleep differently than people. They stand, they shift, they rest in short intervals. Their movement wakes you at first, then fades into familiarity. You learn which sounds mean nothing, which ones signal a change you should notice. This awareness settles into the back of your mind, not sharp enough to prevent rest, but present enough to keep you oriented. Sometimes you wake with your face cold but your back warm. You adjust, turning slowly so heat reaches new places. The animal does not mind. It exhales a long breath that steams briefly before disappearing. You feel it pass across your hands like a reminder that life continues around you even in deep winter. There is a quiet understanding in these shared spaces. Animals are not companions here. They are part of the system that keeps you alive. You feed them, shelter them. In return, they lend you warmth without asking. The exchange feels ancient, older than this land, older than this winter. You notice that sleep comes deeper in these spaces. The steady warmth reduces the need to wake and adjust. Muscles loosen more fully. Fingers stop tingling. Toes regain sensation. The body recognizes stability and takes advantage of it. Dreams shift too. They feel slower, heavier, grounded. You dream of fields, of movement that does not hurry, of warmth that does not vanish. When you wake briefly, you are not startled. The environment feels known, predictable. There are nights when snow piles so high outside that the barn feels sealed off from the world. Sound disappears, wind fades. The animals become the only evidence that the night is still moving forward. You rest inside that quiet, wrapped in a living cocoon. Sometimes discomfort intrudes. The smell grows strong, dust catches in your throat. An animal shifts unexpectedly, brushing too close. You wake, adjust, settle again. These moments are brief. The benefits outweigh the irritations. You learn small habits without thinking about them. Positioning yourself downwind. Keeping bedding just far enough away to stay dry. Listening for changes that matter. These skills arrive through repetition, not instruction. Morning approaches subtly here. Light filters through gaps in boards. Animals stir more frequently. Hooves scrape. Breath grows louder. You wake before the sun fully rises, warmed but stiff joints slow to respond after hours on packed earth. As you sit up, the cold reminds you where you are. You pull on layers, feeling warmth retreat as you move away from the animals. The difference is immediate. It teaches you something without words. You step outside into snow that crunches sharply underfoot. Your breath clouds. The night's shelter feels farther away already. But the memory of warmth lingers in your muscles, easing the first minutes of the day. Looking back, the lesson settles quietly. In a winter buried west, survival borrowed heat wherever it could be found. Fire helped. Fabric helped. But living bodies offered something steadier. Sleep near animals was not comfort as we imagine it now. It was cooperation. Tonight, when darkness returns, you will remember this warmth, the slow breath, the steady presence, and you will understand why people made space for animals not just in their work, but in their rest. The storm announces itself long before it arrives. The air thickens, sound carries differently. Even inside, wrapped in layers, you sense the shift. When the blizzard finally reaches you, it does not rush. It surrounds. Wind pushes snow sideways, then upward, then back again, as if testing every angle at once. You lie still, listening to the outside world dissolve into motion and noise. Sleep, during a storm, feels like an act of trust. You close your eyes, knowing that the night is actively rearranging the landscape beyond your shelter. Roofs creak under new weight. Walls vibrate faintly. Snow hisses as it scrapes along wood and canvas. The sound is constant, filling every pause, leaving little room for silence. You notice how your body responds. Heart rate rises at first. Muscles tighten without permission. This alertness fades slowly as the pattern reveals itself. The storm has a rhythm. Gusts surge, then ease. Snow pounds, then softens. Once you recognize the cycle, your breathing begins to match it. People who live through these nights often describe them as louder than anything else they experienced on the frontier. Louder than towns, louder than camps, louder even than animals. The noise of wind and snow erased all other sounds, isolating you inside a narrow band of sensation. You curl tighter not just for warmth, but for reassurance. The posture feels protective. Your chin tucks toward your chest. Arms fold inward. The body remembers this shape from long before houses or fires existed. It is a shape meant to wait. Sleep comes in brief waves. You drift. A stronger gust pulls you back toward waking. Then you drift again. Each return to rest feels like a small victory. You're not trying to sleep through the storm. You are resting between its breaths. The smell of the air changes subtly as snow thickens. It feels cleaner, somehow stripped of dust and lingering smoke. When the wind finds a gap, that cold purity slips inside sharp but fleeting. You inhale it, once, then bury your face again, letting warmth reclaim the space. There are moments when imagination intrudes. Shapes form in sound. Pressure on walls feels intentional. You remind yourself that the storm has no interest in you personally. It moves according to forces far larger and less concerned with shelter or sleep. This thought is oddly comforting. Indifference feels safer than malice. You wake to a sudden quiet and feel more unsettled than before. The storm has paused. Snow continues to fall, but wind has withdrawn. The absence of noise feels wrong, like a held breath. You lie still listening, waiting for confirmation that the night has not ended. When the wind returns, it brings relief. Familiar chaos settles back into place. Your muscles relax again. Sleep finds its way back deeper this time, carried by the steady insistence of sound. Dreams during storms feel fragmented. They pick up pieces of noise and turn them into motion. You dream of movement without direction, of being carried, of standing still while everything else shifts around you. These dreams fade quickly when you wake, leaving only a sense of having endured something. At some point, exhaustion wins. The body chooses rest over vigilance. Sleep thickens, pushing awareness farther away. Even as the storm continues its work, you slip into longer stretches of unconsciousness, trusting walls, layers, and simple luck. Morning arrives without ceremony. Light seeps in, muted and pale, filtered through snow piled high. The storm has moved on, leaving behind a transformed world. You rise stiffly, feeling the weight of the night in your muscles. Outside, everything looks different. Drifts reshape familiar paths. Landmarks vanish. Sound remains muffled. The storm has erased yesterday and written something new. You stand quietly, letting your eyes adjust, letting your mind catch up. Looking back on the night, you understand something important. Storm sleep is not restful in the usual sense. It is not meant to be. It is endurance in its purest form, a series of small rests stitched together by patience. Tonight may bring calm, or it may bring another storm. You cannot control that. What you carry forward is the knowledge that even in the loudest nights, even when the world feels unstable, the body can still find moments of rest. You return inside, already thinking about the next night, knowing that sleep will come again, not because conditions improve, but because you adapt. Cold does not stay on the surface. After enough nights, you feel it move inward, settling into joints and lungs, changing how your body behaves, even before you notice symptoms. Sleep becomes one of the first places this shows. You lie down already tired, but rest does not arrive cleanly. Breathing feels different. Muscles ache in ways that do not fade with position. Winter illnesses move quietly through frontier spaces. A cough picked up on the trail lingers longer when nights are cold. Fevers feel sharper when warmth is scarce. You notice how sleep shifts when the body is fighting something unseen. Dreams grow shallow. Waking comes more often. The body refuses to let go completely. You tuck blankets tighter around your chest, instinctively protecting what feels most vulnerable. Breath rasps slightly on the way out. You adjust your position to ease it, propping yourself higher, turning your face toward clearer air. These adjustments happen without thought. The body learns quickly when comfort and survival overlap. There is no clear boundary between rest and recovery here. Sleep is medicine, but it is incomplete medicine. It helps, but it cannot solve everything. You wake with the same tightness you fell asleep with, yet without sleep, it would be worse. This understanding settles in quietly shaping expectations. People notice patterns even without naming them. Those who slept closer to warmth often fared better through sickness. Those who rested fully clothed retained strength longer. Those who pushed themselves too hard during illness sometimes didn't recover. These observations circulated as advice passed between families, camps, and neighbours. You feel how cold air affects breathing at night. Each inhale feels sharper, each exhale leaves you slightly weaker. You pull fabric closer to your face, softening the air before it reaches your lungs. It helps. Not dramatically, but enough. Sleep becomes fragmented again. You drift for a while, then wake with a need to cough or shift. The body refuses long stillness. You learn to accept these interruptions as part of healing rather than failure. Each return to rest counts. There is a small habit you notice among those who have endured many winters. They drink something warm before sleep when illness threatens. Not for taste, but for the way warmth settles inside, easing the body just enough to allow rest. Water, broth, whatever is available. It becomes a quiet ritual. The mind behaves differently too. Illness dulls fear and sharpens discomfort. Sounds blur together. The storm outside feels distant, less urgent than the ache inside your chest. Sleep pulls inward, focusing attention on the body rather than the world. You wake sweating despite the cold, then chill quickly as moisture cools. This cycle repeats. You learn to change layers even when energy is low, knowing that dampness steals heat faster than cold air alone. The effort feels heavy but necessary. Morning comes with stiffness and fatigue, yet also with a sense of having made it through another night. Survival feels incremental. You do not think in terms of recovery. You think in terms of getting through today. Looking back, these nights teach you something fundamental. Sleep during illness on the frontier is not restorative in the way we imagine now. It is supportive. It keeps you balanced on the edge between decline and endurance. As night returns again, you prepare with quiet care. Extra layers, closer warmth, a place where breathing feels easiest. You lie down knowing sleep may come unevenly, but you welcome whatever it offers. The lesson settles gently as you close your eyes. In a snow-buried west, sleep does not promise healing. It offers companionship to the body as it works hour by hour through cold and weakness, holding you steady until morning returns. You begin counting wood without realizing you're doing it. Not numbers exactly, but presence, weight, shape. The stack beside the hearth looks smaller than it did yesterday. A few good pieces remain. A handful of thinner ones wait behind them. As you lie down, your eyes find the pile automatically measuring how long warmth might last through the night. Firewood becomes a quiet companion to sleep. You drift knowing that heat depends on it, that rest is tied to fuel in a way that feels intimate and immediate. If the fire fades too early, the cold will creep in and pull you back toward waking. If it burns too fast, morning will arrive with nothing left but ash and regret. You settle close enough to feel warmth without risking sparks. The fire's glow pulses gently like a slow heartbeat. Each shift of flame feels meaningful. You note how the thicker logs burn steadier, while the lighter ones flare brightly before giving up. These observations follow you into half-sleep, not as thought, but as awareness. The night stretches. At some point you wake without knowing why. The room feels cooler, the fire has settled into embers. You sit up slowly, joints stiff, and reach for a piece of wood. The sound it makes when placed on coals is familiar and reassuring. A brief flare, a return to glow, you lie back down satisfied. This rhythm repeats itself across winter nights. Wake, feed, rest. It becomes so normal that it no longer feels disruptive. The interruption is built into sleep itself. You rest in sections stitched together by brief acts of care. There is a particular anxiety that comes with dwindling fuel. You feel it before it becomes urgent. It settles in your chest as a low tension, shaping dreams and half-thoughts. You imagine the pile shrinking faster than expected. You imagine wind pulling heat away faster than you planned. These worries soften as you adjust, as you add another layer, as you tuck closer to warmth. You notice how the smell of burning wood changes as the night goes on. Early flames smell sharp and resinous. Later embers smell softer, earthier. This shift signals time passing more reliably than any clock. Your body responds to it, preparing for deeper rest or lighter waking depending on the scent in the air. Sometimes you choose not to add wood. You test the night instead, pulling blankets closer, seeing how long warmth holds. This decision feels calculated but also hopeful. Every night you stretch resources a little further, learning how much cold you can tolerate without losing rest entirely. The fire speaks softly, pops, settles, sighs. These sounds weave into your dreams. You dream of carrying bundles of stacking carefully of warmth held and released. Even asleep, your mind stays connected to the work that keeps you alive. At some point, the fire dies down more than you expected. Cold touches your face. You wake fully this time. There is no panic, just movement. You add wood, wait for response, adjust your position. The room warms again slowly. You let out a breath you didn't realize you were holding. Morning approaches quietly. The fire burns low but steady. Enough remains to take the edge off waking. You rise stiffly, step toward the hearth, and assess what is left. The pile is smaller but not empty. Relief washes through you. As you prepare for the day, you carry the night's lesson forward. Sleep here is never separate from planning. Rest depends on preparation awareness and small decisions made while half awake. You do not sleep despite responsibility. You sleep alongside it. Tonight we'll ask the same questions again. How much wood remains? How cold will it get? How deeply can you rest? You will answer them the same way you always do, not with certainty, but with attention. As you lie down once more, firelight flickering low, you allow your eyes to close, knowing that sleep will come in pieces. That is enough. It has always been enough. By now, you no longer think of insulation as something purchased or installed. It is something gathered, borrowed, and rearranged. As you prepare to sleep, your hands move automatically, adjusting small things that make a large difference. A folded cloth placed at a seam, a sack leaned against a wall, a hat tucked over a gap where cold insists on returning. These habits feel minor, almost invisible, yet they shape the night more than grand solutions ever could. You lie down knowing that the room will never be truly warm, but it can be made less cold in careful ways. That distinction matters. It allows sleep to exist where comfort cannot. You notice how the floor steals warmth relentlessly. Even thick blankets compress under your weight, losing their protective air. To counter this, you layer creatively. Boards beneath bedding, empty crates turned on their sides, rolled clothing positioned where your body presses hardest. Each layer slows the cold just enough to matter. Walls receive the same attention. You hang spare fabric not for decoration but for function. Coats, sacks, even curtains made from flour bags. They sway slightly when wind slips through breaking drafts into softer currents. The room feels calmer when air moves gently rather than sharply. There is a small satisfaction in these adjustments. You feel clever without thinking about it. The environment pushes, you respond. This back and forth becomes a quiet game played nightly, one where the prize is rest. You notice that sound changes with insulation. Wind softens. The whistle becomes a murmur. Snow scraping against walls loses its edge. These shifts make sleep easier not because the storm weakens, but because its presence becomes less intrusive. At some point you wake to adjust something you prepared earlier. A cloth has slipped. A gap has reopened. You correct it with practiced ease, barely opening your eyes. These moments feel less like waking and more like turning over in sleep. You learn to insulate yourself as well as the space, wrapping scarves round wrists, pulling socks higher, tucking fabric into itself to create pockets of warmth. These small tricks stack, each one adding a thin layer of protection. Moisture remains the quiet threat. Insulation that traps dampness becomes useless by morning. You stay aware of where breath settles, where snow melt seeps. You shift bedding away from walls that sweat with cold. This awareness does not feel anxious. It feels learned. There are nights when your efforts feel insufficient. Cold still finds you. Sleep remains shallow. You accept this without frustration. Some nights are meant for endurance rather than rest. The work you have done ensures that even these nights do not defeat you. Other nights surprise you. You wake after longer stretches, surprised by how deeply you rested. Nothing dramatic changed. No new materials appeared, only arrangement improved. You take note of what worked, storing the knowledge for later. Morning reveals the evidence of your choices. Frost outlines the gaps you missed. Fabric hangs stiff with cold where it absorbed moisture. You adjust again, for tonight refining the system. Over time, these habits shape your sense of control. Winter remains powerful, but it no longer feels absolute. You can influence how it touches you. That understanding carries into sleep, easing the mind. As you lie down once more, you scan the space briefly. Everything is where it should be. Nothing more can be done. You let go, trusting the layers you've built. Sleep arrives, gently supported by dozens of small decisions made without fanfare. In a snow-buried West survival, often comes not from bold acts but from careful attention paid again and again. The cold shapes your dreams in ways you do not notice at first. It does not always appear as snow or ice. Instead, it presses into the edges of sleep, changing how deep you go and how long you stay there. You lie down tired, but your rest feels lighter than it once did, as if part of you remains awake, keeping watch even while the rest drifts. You notice this when you wake briefly and feel no confusion about where you are. The room registers instantly. Fire, wall, door. Your body seems to hover closer to the surface of sleep, ready to rise if needed. This alertness does not feel stressful anymore. It feels trained. Dreams arrive in shorter scenes. They do not wander far. You dream of simple tasks, carrying wood, adjusting blankets, closing a door against wind. These dreams fade quickly when you wake, leaving behind no strong images, only a sense of motion completed. Cold changes the body's priorities. Long, heavy sleep becomes less common. Instead, rest spreads out in intervals. You sink under for a while, rise toward awareness, then settle again. This pattern repeats through the night. It is not dramatic. It is steady. You begin to recognize a particular moment when sleep deepens. It often comes after you adjust warmth successfully, after the fire is fed, after a draft is sealed, after your body finally stops shivering. In these moments, muscles loosen fully and the mind lets go more completely. There is a strange clarity to waking from cold sleep. You open your eyes and feel present immediately. No haze, no confusion. The environment has demanded this sharpness. Your body has learned to wake efficiently, conserving energy. Some nights dreams feel vivid despite their simplicity. Colours stand out. Sounds linger. The mind seems to sharpen images when the body is under strain. You might dream of warmth so intense it almost burns, or of movement so slow it feels suspended. These dreams feel restorative in their own way. You notice that time behaves oddly during the night. Hours pass without clear markers. You rely on sensations instead. The fire's state, the stiffness in your joints, the change in sound outside. These cues replace clocks. Sleep becomes less about duration and more about timing. You wake briefly to stretch fingers and toes, restoring circulation. The tingling reminds you that the body remains active even in rest. You settle again, drawing warmth inward, letting breath slow. As the night progresses, rest grows deeper in small increments. The body accumulates enough recovery to function, even if it never fully disconnects. This feels like success rather than failure. You have learned what kind of sleep winter allows. Morning arrives with less grogginess than you expect. You feel tired, yes, but clear. Your mind wakes quickly, already planning the day. The sleep you gathered, though fragmented, did its job. Looking back, you understand that extreme cold reshapes sleep rather than destroying it. The body adapts by staying closer to the surface, ready to respond while still finding moments of restoration. This balance keeps you moving through winter. Tonight, when you lie down again, you will not expect deep oblivion. You will welcome intervals of rest, knowing they are enough. You close your eyes, listening to the quiet signals of warmth and cold, letting sleep come as it always does now in measured waves. You do not fully trust the night anymore, and the night does not ask you to. Even as sleep settles over you, part of your awareness stays tuned to the edges of sound. Outside the thin boundary of walls or canvas, life continues on its own terms. Snow may soften the land, but it does not silence it completely. You lie still and listen. At first, everything blends together. Wind through grass buried beneath drifts, the faint crack of ice shifting along a stream. Then something separates itself from the background. A sound that moves rather than drifts. A pause. Another sound closer now. On the frontier, night watches were not always formal. There was rarely a posted guard unless danger felt immediate. Instead, people slept in turns of awareness. Someone always stirred lightly. Someone always listened. This rhythm developed naturally, especially in places where predators still moved freely across the land. You feel your body tense without rising. Your breathing slows. You wait. The sound returns. A low drawn-out call carried on cold air. It is distant but unmistakable once you have heard it before. Wolves. Not threatening yet, just present, marking space and testing the quiet. You do not reach for a weapon. Not yet. That would mean fully waking, breaking the fragile balance of rest. Instead, you stay still and listen. Wolves often pass through without interest if nothing draws them closer. Panic invites attention. Stillness lets the night move on. The animals nearby respond before you do. A horse shifts its weight. A cow snorts softly. These reactions reassure you. If danger were closer, their movements would be sharper. You trust their instincts as much as your own. Sleep resumes in shallow layers. You drift, then rise again when sound changes. A branch snaps. Snow compresses under weight. These noises are harder to place. Your mind assembles possibilities without urgency. Wind, ice, an animal passing through. There is a strange intimacy in these moments. You're aware of the world beyond shelter without engaging it. You share the night with creatures that do not recognize walls or ownership. The land belongs to all of you, equally at least after dark. Some nights pass without incident. Others carry repeated calls, circling sounds that fade and return. You learn to distinguish curiosity from intent. A pack that keeps moving, one that lingers. These distinctions shape how deeply you allow yourself to rest. You notice how sleep changes when danger feels possible. Dreams become lighter, more easily interrupted, yet they do not disappear. The body insists on rest even when the mind stays cautious. You accept this compromise. At times, human voices answer the night. A shout, a call meant to announce presence rather than challenge. This simple sound often pushes animals farther away. You hear it and relax slightly, knowing someone else has taken a turn listening. You drift again closer to sleep now. The sounds thin. The night resumes its quieter patterns. Wind returns to dominance, snow settles, the land exhales. Morning reveals tracks that tell the rest of the story. Paw prints etched into drifts. Paths circling but never crossing too close. Evidence that the night passed with interest but restraint. You note this without excitement. It is simply information. As you stretch and prepare for the day, the lesson settles gently. Sleep on the winter frontier is not about ignoring the world. It is about remaining part of it even while resting. Awareness does not vanish. It softens. Tonight, when darkness returns, you will listen again. You will sleep knowing that the land moves around you, that life continues beyond your walls. This knowledge does not prevent rest. It frames it. You close your eyes once more, breathing evenly, letting sleep return while the world watches itself. Night settles differently when women are the ones shaping it. You feel it in the quiet preparation that happens before sleep is even possible. While daylight fades, hands move steadily, anticipating the needs of hours not yet arrived. Blankets are checked. Children are fed one last time. Water is set within reach. Nothing is rushed because rushing wastes energy that will be needed later. You notice how these routines carry calm into the night. There's reassurance in knowing that someone has already thought through what might be needed. Extra layers are folded and placed where they can be found in the dark. A lamp is positioned carefully, not to light the room, but to be reachable if waking becomes necessary. These small acts shape how rest unfolds. In many frontier households, women bore the responsibility of managing nighttime conditions, especially during winter. Their work did not end with the evening meal. Sleep itself required tending. Fires were banked correctly. Bedding was arranged to keep children warmest. Doors were checked again even if they had already been checked twice. You lie down aware of this quiet labour around you. Even if you didn't perform it yourself, you feel its effects. The room feels ready. The night feels anticipated rather than endured. That readiness makes it easier to let go. Children wake more easily in the cold, a whimper, a restless shift. You feel someone rise quietly, moving without sound, soothing without fully waking the house. A blanket is pulled higher. A small body is drawn closer to warmth. Sleep resumes almost immediately, barely disturbed. There is a particular steadiness to these movements. They are practiced, efficient, no wasted motion. The night does not feel interrupted by care. Care is part of the night's rhythm. You notice how women often slept lightly by habit rather than fear. Their rest carried awareness tuned to the smallest change in breathing or movement. This alertness was not dramatic. It was woven into sleep itself, a skill learned through repetition. Dreams come and go around this awareness. You drift into them knowing that if something shifts, you will surface quickly. This knowledge allows deeper rest than constant worry ever could. The emotional tone of the night shifts under this care. Anxiety softens. The cold feels more manageable. Even hunger seems quieter. There is comfort in knowing that someone is watching over the night even while resting. Morning often reveals the evidence of this labour. Children wake without illness. Fires are still alive. The room holds warmth longer than expected. These outcomes rarely receive comment. They're simply how things are meant to be. As you rise, you carry forward the sense that sleep did not happen by accident. It was guided, shaped, protected. This understanding lingers as you move into the day. The lesson settles gently. In a winter buried west, rest depended not only on shelter and fire, but on steady, unseen work. Sleep was made possible by hands that planned for it long before night arrived. You close your eyes again later, knowing that this quiet preparation will happen again. The night will be met with the same care, and within that care rest will find its place. As the night deepens, words begin to matter in a different way. Not the kind spoken loudly or often, but the ones repeated softly, carried through habit, rather than urgency. You hear them murmured near the bed, spoken just above a whisper, shaped to fit the quiet. These words are not meant to change the weather or warm the room. They are meant to steady the mind. Prayer slips into winter nights almost unnoticed. It does not arrive with ceremony. It appears as a sentence remembered from childhood, a phrase spoken out of rhythm with breath, a familiar ending offered even when the beginning is forgotten. You lie still as it happens around you or within you, and feel the atmosphere shift slightly, becoming calmer, slower. In many frontier homes, bedtime prayer marked the final act of the day. It replaced the certainty people no longer had. When roads vanished and storms closed in, prayer became a boundary between effort and rest. Once spoken, the day was released. What could be done had been done. You notice how these rituals create permission to sleep. The mind, no longer responsible for every outcome, loosens its grip. Fear quiets. Planning fades. The night feels less like a threat and more like a shared experience, something endured together rather than alone. Children often listen with eyes already closed. The rhythm of familiar words carries them deeper into rest. Adults speak more softly sometimes, barely audibly, as if not to disturb sleep even as they invite it. The sound settles into the room like warmth does, gradually and without force. Not every prayer sounds the same. Some are formal, learned long ago. Others are improvised, stitched together from gratitude and worry. Both serve the same purpose. They slow the body. They narrow attention. They signal that vigilance can ease, if only slightly. You feel how your breathing changes as the words continue. Longer exhales, less tension in the shoulders. Even the cold seems less sharp when framed by repetition and familiarity. The ritual does not remove hardship. It changes how hardship is carried. There are nights when prayer feels distant, when exhaustion overwhelms intention. On those nights, the ritual shortens or disappears entirely. Sleep still comes, but it feels thinner, less anchored. You notice the difference without judgment. Sometimes the words are replaced by other comforts. A hymn hummed quietly, a story recalled, a familiar line spoken without clear meaning anymore, carried forward simply because it has always been there. These moments serve the same function, guiding the mind toward rest. You lie still as the final words fade. Silence returns, but it feels different now. Softer, less empty. The room feels settled, as if something has been placed gently into it. Dreams follow more smoothly. They feel less restless. Images blur at the edges, held together by calm rather than urgency. When you wake briefly, the memory of the words lingers, making it easier to return to sleep. Morning often erases the sound of prayer entirely. Words spoken in the dark rarely survive daylight. Yet their effect remains. You wake feeling slightly steadier even if the cold has not eased. The lesson settles quietly. In a winter buried west, sleep required more than warmth and shelter. It required a way to let go. Rituals provided that release, offering rest not just to the body, but to the mind, carrying the weight of the night. Tonight, when darkness returns, these words will return too, spoken softly, shaping sleep once again. When snow closes the world, evenings stretch longer than they should. Darkness arrives early and stays, leaving hours to fill before sleep feels possible. You sit or lie quietly, listening to the fire settle, aware that there is nowhere to go and nothing urgent to do. This waiting becomes part of winter life, a slow corridor leading toward rest. Conversation fills some of that space. It begins casually, almost lazily, then deepens as the night settles. Stories repeat themselves without apology. Everyone knows how they end. That familiarity is the point. Predictable words feel comforting when everything else feels uncertain. You listen half engaged, letting voices wash over you. Laughter appears briefly, then fades. Humor here is gentle, not sharp. It rises from shared experience rather than surprise. A memory of summer work, a story about a neighbor, something small that reminds everyone that life exists beyond cold and snow. These moments soften the edges of the night. When talk runs out, silence takes over without awkwardness. Silence does not feel empty now. It feels earned. You sit with it easily, watching firelight dance across walls, feeling time move without measuring it. Children find ways to occupy themselves quietly. Fingers trace patterns in dust or straw. A small game repeats itself without pieces. These activities drift naturally towards sleep ending, not with instruction, but with fading attention. You notice how boredom itself becomes a bridge to rest. With no stimulation to chase, the mind slows. Thoughts wander, then settle. Sleep does not arrive suddenly. It approaches gradually, like a tide you do not notice until your feet are already wet. There are nights when rest comes easily after these long hours. Other nights resist. You lie awake longer than expected, mind circling familiar worries. Yet even this wakefulness feels different. It is not restless. It is quiet and contained. You become aware of the subtle comfort of being snowbound together. Isolation from the outside world strengthens connection inside. Time shared becomes time softened. Even disagreements feel distant in this enforced stillness. Eventually bodies begin to shift. Someone stretches, someone yawns. Blankets are pulled closer. The evening dissolves naturally into sleep without ceremony. No announcement marks the transition. It simply happens. You lie down, feeling the weight of the day lift slightly. The long quiet hours have done their work. The mind feels less sharp, more pliable. Sleep slips in without resistance. Morning will come soon enough, bringing cold tasks and movement. For now the night has fulfilled its purpose. It has carried you gently from activity to rest, using nothing more than time and shared presence. As you drift, you understand something simple. In a winter buried west, boredom was not an enemy. It was a companion that led people towards sleep, slowing life just enough to make rest possible. Before sleep fully takes you, your thoughts begin to lean forward instead of back. Winter nights invite this gently. You lie there imagining things that are not yet real but feel close enough to touch. The sound of water running freely again. The weight of snow lifting from roofs. The return of colour to land that has lived in white for too long. You picture mornings that do not sting your face. Doors that open without effort. Ground that gives instead of resisting every step. These images drift through your mind without urgency. They are not demands, they are reminders. Something beyond this still exists. You notice how often these thoughts arrive while lying still, not during the work of the day, but during the quiet just before sleep. The body rests and the mind allows itself to wander ahead, testing hope in small, safe amounts. These imaginings feel communal even when unspoken. Others nearby are thinking similar things. You sense it in the way conversations trail off in the pauses that linger a little longer than usual. Everyone is carrying a private version of the same expectation. Sleep comes more easily when these thoughts are allowed to surface. They soften the edges of the present moment. The cold feels less permanent. The night feels less final. You do not need spring to arrive tomorrow. You only need to know it will arrive. Dreams pick up these ideas and reshape them. Snow melts suddenly. Paths appear where none existed. Movement becomes easier. These dreams feel light, almost buoyant, lifting you briefly above the weight of winter. You wake once or twice and find that the thoughts return quickly, picking up where they left off. Anticipation does not disturb rest here. It supports it. The future offers a place for the mind to settle when the present grows heavy. As the night deepens, these images fade naturally. Sleep takes precedence. The body sinks deeper, satisfied with the knowledge that endurance has direction. Morning will still be cold. The work will still be hard. Snow will still demand effort. Yet the presence of what comes next changes how the night feels. It gives shape to waiting. As you drift further under, the lesson settles quietly. Hope does not need to be loud to be effective. On the frontier, it often appeared as a simple picture held in the dark, carried gently into sleep. As you settle for the night, you become aware of differences that were always there but easier to ignore during the day. The way warmth gathers in certain rooms and never quite reaches others. The thickness of blankets compared across households. The presence or absence of small comforts that change how sleep feels. Winter has a way of making these contrasts impossible to miss. You lie down in a space that holds heat, reasonably well aware that not everyone is so fortunate. Some sleep closer to fires that burn low and fast. Others rest in rooms where frost creeps along walls unchecked. These differences shape nights quietly, influencing how often people wake and how deeply they rest. You notice that those with more resources tend to sleep with fewer interruptions. Their bedding is thicker, their walls tighter, their fires steadier. They wake less often to tend warmth or adjust layers. Sleep stretches longer for them, less fragmented, less demanding. Elsewhere, rest requires more effort. People rise repeatedly through the night to feed fires or seal drafts. They adjust constantly, never fully surrendering to sleep. Their mornings begin with heavier fatigue, not from labour alone, but from nights spent negotiating cold. These differences rarely become topics of conversation. Winter does not encourage comparison out loud. Everyone faces hardship just in varying degrees. Yet you feel the contrast in your own body, in how rested you feel when morning arrives. Children notice these differences instinctively. They sleep deeper where warmth holds and stir more where it does not. Adults adjust quietly often, giving up their own comfort to protect younger bodies from cold. Sleep becomes another resource redistributed without announcement. You sense how expectations shift based on circumstance. Those accustomed to better conditions find rough nights more unsettling. Those long used to thin walls and short rest accept disruption without surprise. Adaptation shapes perception as much as reality does. As you lie there, you reflect without judgment. Winter makes visible what other seasons soften. It reveals how rest itself can be unevenly distributed, not as punishment or reward, but as consequence. Sleep arrives carrying this understanding lightly. It does not weigh on you. It simply becomes part of the story the night is telling. You drift, knowing that morning will find everyone changed slightly by the cold, though not equally. The lesson settles gently. On the frontier, sleep reflected circumstance as clearly as shelter or food. Winter did not erase these differences. It highlighted them quietly in the dark. The last night of winter does not announce itself. It arrives quietly, looking much like the others. Snow still rests heavy on the land. Cold still lingers in corners. Yet something feels different as you lie down. Not warmer exactly. Not easier. Just softer around the edges. You settle into your place with movements that no longer require thought. Hands know where blankets fall best. Your body chooses a position without negotiation. Muscles release faster now, trusting the patterns learned over many nights. The room holds you the way it always has, familiar and unremarkable, which is its greatest gift. Outside, the night behaves itself. Wind moves gently. Snow stays put. The silence feels wide, but not empty. You listen briefly, then stop listening. Awareness loosens its grip, content to drift. You breathe slowly. Each breath feels complete. The cold no longer surprises you. It exists, but it no longer demands constant response. You have learned its language. You have learned how much it asks and how little it gives. That understanding brings calm. Sleep arrives without effort, not in fragments this time, but in a longer, smoother stretch. Dreams do not push or pull. They simply pass through light and unremarkable like clouds thinning toward morning. When you wake briefly, it is without tension. You recognize the room instantly. Nothing needs adjusting. You return to rest easily, carrying no urgency with you. Morning will come soon. It will bring work, movement, and cold again. But tonight has done its work too. It has carried you gently to the edge of rest, reminding you that even the hardest seasons move forward one night at a time. You lie still now, breathing evenly, letting the quiet hold you. Word count 11:18. Wind down now, everything begins to slow. Your breathing lengthens, each inhale softer than the last, each exhale, easing weight out of your shoulders and down into the ground beneath you. The cold that once demanded attention fades into the background, no longer sharp, no longer urgent. It becomes part of the stillness. You no longer need to listen for anything. No fire to tend, no wind to measure, no sound to interpret. The night has settled, and so have you. Thoughts loosen their hold and drift away one by one. The images of snow cabins, wagons, and quiet rooms grow dimmer like lanterns turned low. You do not follow them. You simply let them pass. Your body feels heavy in the best way, supported, contained, safe. Muscles soften, hands rest without tension. Your face smooths as the effort of endurance finally releases. There is nothing left to plan, nothing left to anticipate. Morning will arrive when it arrives, for now rest is enough. The world grows quieter. Even the idea of winter fades, leaving only warmth and calm in its place. You breathe, you rest, you drift. End of script. Sweet dreams.